Hey everybody, this is Lisa Harper, and you're listening to the Not Ready Yet Curating Conversations for the Aging Journey podcast. This is the show that changes the conversations we have with our loved ones about aging and life decisions. Let's have more honest conversations where we speak the quiet parts out loud. Today's guest is someone who has dedicated her career to helping families navigate one of the most emotional and challenging transitions they may ever face, moving a loved one with dementia. Cindy Greer is the founder of Transition with Care, a certified senior move manager and a certified dementia practitioner who has spent more than 15 years helping caregivers plan safe, compassionate, and successful relocations. From creating familiar, comforting environments to reducing confusion, preventing falls, and preserving dignity, Cindy understands that a move is about so much more than packing boxes. Her expertise has made her a nationally recognized speaker and educator, and in 2026, she was elected by her peers to the board of directors for the National Association of Senior and Specialty Move Managers, a testament to the trust and respect she's earned within the profession. To our audience of adult children of aging parents, I want you to walk away feeling more confident, even if you're years away from facing this decision. This will be less about logistics of moving and more about the how to know when, how to prepare, how to reduce trauma. Cindy, this is going to be so valuable to our audience. I thank you for being here on Not Ready Yet, and I'm so glad you're here to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so pleased to be here and to bring some awareness to dementia moves.
Yes. When you're moving with someone with dementia, how is it different from any other, not just move, but any other senior move?
Yeah. So I think some of the biggest difference is there's a caregiver that also factors in there prominently. So these moves definitely were, focusing on what's best for the person that is being moved with dementia. But we also have to be very cognizant of the caregiver's transition as well. So it's really like, I won't say two moves, but we really have to be very aware of the caregiver's input for that person, their loved one that's moving with dementia.
What is something that you have found helping people living with dementia and their caregiver move?
Each situation is very unique, even though some of the processes are similar. Again, that caregiver factors in so much. Some of the moves that we've been involved with, it's when that caregiver is no longer able to care for that individual safely, maybe in the home. And also, caring for somebody that is living with dementia is one of the hardest and most stressful things that an individual can do. So it takes a huge toll on the caregiver. With that being said, another area or time that a move might be in order is if the person that has dementia is starting to wander. And then that becomes a safety issue. So then finding a situation that allows them to be safe and not wander. And a lot of times that is relocating them or moving them to a memory care community where there is heavily monitored entrances and exits. So I would say those are kind of some of the primary drivers for moving a loved one to a community.
Is there any guidance you can give on the time to start planning? I know people want to stay home, they want to stay where it's familiar. What is your best advice to families that maybe even before the wandering starts? Because again, the caregiver burnout is real. And to make sure that they're being, looked at and protected and taken care of too.
Honestly, I think that when a diagnosis of dementia has been made, that's a huge shock. And to that point, I had an adult son. This has been over a year ago. They saw the signs that his dad was having some cognitive issues. Then came the diagnosis. He's the only son. And so when that happened, he reached out to me almost a little too soon, but I applauded him because he was already thinking proactively that at some point they may need to make a move. And he's thinking, they may need to stay in Charlotte. I think his mom at that point wanted to stay in Charlotte, but, also to potentially look at relocating them to be closer to him as the only child. What ended up happening is we talked a lot, and at that point in time I felt like he probably needed some additional resources and conversations since it was such a new diagnosis. And so I actually also gave him a geriatric care management company to talk to about some of these issues or concerns. And then I also talked to his mother. And I met with them. And again, he's early stages and he was still very much presenting very well. And so they were starting to explore all these different options for moving. Well, going to the Boston area was going to become too expensive. And so they were looking at some things here in North Carolina. All that to say is that, they are on a waiting list to move. It's been even more than a year later. We're staying in touch with them and they're staying in touch with us about when the move is going to take place. But they know that at some point he's going to need more care than she's going to need. And so they're being extremely proactive about it, which I think, takes a lot of that anxiety out when you start thinking a little bit ahead and not just get paralyzed in that diagnosis and, kind of just starting to muddle through it.
Yeah, and kudos to that son. I mean,
yeah.
And that's what I'm hoping this podcast brings to adult kids is just to be thinking about things and to start
Right.
planting seeds about questions. And I always say these conversations aren't yes, no, and done. They can go on for a long time. And then when you add to the fact that maybe a community that you're trying to get into has a wait list of over a year,
right.
You start that too late, you are putting yourself into just the unknown of how can we handle this on our own.
Yeah, and then another situation that can evolve is another couple that we actually helped downsize and move 3 years ago, contacted me last week, and his wife now has a diagnosis of dementia. And so he contacted me and told me what was going on, that, they are looking at moving. They're on the wait list for 2 communities, but, he wanted to go ahead and start planning. And we can kind of do that, when there are floor plans available, so we can start planning what can move into the apartment when it becomes available, or a similar apartment. But so again, they're starting to plan. They know they want to make a move. They don't have family close by, but there is family support. Then I met with them, and then he called me yesterday and said that one of the communities called and said that they thought they would have a 2-bedroom option available to them kind of sooner than later. So then that jump starts, because they'll probably, if one becomes available, then they will be moving within 60 to 90 days.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that can sometimes be the catalyst for everything, is just the space to move into. When you're working with the families that have somebody living with dementia, is the next move going into memory care for the most part?
I think it just depends. I have 3 situations right now where they're couples, and like the one I just mentioned, but one is actually going to be leaving the home with his wife that has a farther along stage in her dementia journey, but they're planning on moving into a continuing care retirement community, but they're going to go into independent living because they feel like that transition, he wants to still be caring for his wife, but he needs more support for himself, and the house is no longer safe. But they feel like, that's going to be the next best step. And then as she progresses, there will be they do have a memory care community on campus. And so they'll be able to transition her from the independent living apartment where he would remain, and then she would transition to memory care. So he can still be there, but a lot of the caregiving responsibility will be kind of removed from him a little bit, and that he won't be making meals and that type of thing. Now, this other couple that I just mentioned, they are planning on moving into assisted living together. And then as anything progresses with her diagnosis, again, there is the community that does have, secured entrances and exits if she needs to have, more monitoring. So as you can see, there's a lot of variety.
Yeah.
And yes, we have also directly relocated individuals with dementia from the home when the caregiver is pretty much exhausted. I mean, people's love for each other, people will just go above and beyond. And then when it gets to the point that the caregiver's health is starting to suffer, then hopefully either another family member is stepping in and saying, hey, this really can't go on anymore. You're suffering with this. And it's a hard decision for somebody to directly admit their husband, spouse, partner to a memory care community while they're staying in the house. It's very challenging, and mostly for the caregiver, that's the emotion. The individual with dementia, depending on how they're reacting to that disease, some of them are very complacent or very easy about it. Some have some behavioral issues that start coming out, but typically after that relocation, there is a transition period, and then things just kind of settle into a new routine. But getting there is challenging.
A lot of families face that. You kind of touched on the dynamic of, I guess, for lack of a better word, the guilt,
Yeah.
struggle with the guilt of making that decision. Because like you say, the healthy caregiver is the one that kind of falls on.
Yeah.
And it's more or less them saying, I have done all I can, and I am now at a place that I realize someone else needs to we need help. I need help.
Right.
I know the numbers are starting to come up and grow, but I think there's so many out there that don't identify themselves as a caregiver.
Exactly.
There is that struggle with guilt on how to navigate the emotional side, of moving them and making that decision. Sometimes it's harder for some people to have that realization that this is too much. I heard someone in a kind of like a support group, and she was like, I am just going to admit that I am not created to be a caregiver. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I know I need help. And I just thought, I don't hear enough people maybe saying that when maybe they're thinking that we take this on thinking we are supposed to.
Right, totally. Yeah, I applaud that woman. Because really caregiving is a huge responsibility, and it's done out of love and commitment and dedication, but not everybody is wired to be a caregiver. And you mentioned support groups. That's why I think it's so important to seek out information, to seek out other options for care. And yeah, there is a lot of guilt associated with caregiving and or relocating someone to a community that you can no longer really care for. And even, once somebody is relocated out of the home to memory care, there's still caregiving that's involved. You are having to kind of monitor what's going on with your loved one in a community. And while you may not have as much physical, you still have the mental responsibility of making sure that your loved one is being cared appropriately. So it does alleviate a lot of physical burden to a caregiver, but there's still going to be those mental and, time commitment to caring for your loved one.
Also, by no means is any of this easy. It's just a shifting of then responsibility and accountability. That is
Yeah.
a permanent change in your life of making that decision and they're no longer there. So the grief, I call, griefs with big G's and little G's, right? We have a lot of them. And I think, then there's the grieving of them not even being there.
Right.
Yeah.
Holy.
Yeah.
And let's not forget too that relocating somebody to a community, I mean, that takes huge amount of financial resources. So those people that are able to afford that, they have more options.
Yeah.
And there's also in-home care that can provide some support to a caregiver, and there are options for respite care with adult daycare centers too. So just wanted to point that out.
The transition sometimes it's not an option for families
Right.
if it's not a viable move financially. So yeah, to have resources, like you say, to start getting education and information about your particular situation. We live in different places. Adult kids are all over the place. And
That's right.
and so what makes the most sense? I hear a lot of families trying to figure that part out too, where which city, which move makes the most sense. And you had touched upon, the move itself. Is there a different timeline? If they're going into a community, like you say, that really is the catalyst to
Right.
now we start backing up from that date. What does that look like when you start getting in there and they've made the decision? How does that differ than a traditional move?
Yeah, so I don't know that it differs a lot in some ways from a traditional move, but it is more of a intense emotional situation typically. And when somebody signs on the dotted line with a community to have their loved one move in, the time starts ticking there. And usually these moves or transitions usually are taking place in about a 2-week time frame. And then we're meeting again with our clients. Sometimes we're able to include the person that has dementia with some of these decisions. Sometimes we are not. And we have to, for the well-being of the person living with dementia, we kind of have to do a lot of this planning without their involvement, in which case we're relying on the caregiver to convey to us the essence of that person, things in their space, their current home, that yes, we want things to feel very comfortable, just like a smaller version of what they have been living in their home. And we take great pains to kind of plan that room out and what those really important objects and chairs and bed and bedding and pillows and pictures and books, how that all is going to set up, all keeping everything, safe and comfortable. Comfort and familiarity is really important for these moves.
Yeah. Yeah. And so once the move is complete, do you have any best advice on once somebody's now moved, what are some details that make the biggest difference and now once somebody is somewhere?
So again, I think we're relying on the caregiver that really knows that personality of that person and where they are and what they're going to respond to, when they walk into their room. A lot of the communities do have little areas, alcoves, that when you walk into the room prior to walking in through the door, it will have the person's name and we'll put a picture depending on what that situation is. But, it might be if they served in the military or something like that, it might be some memorabilia so that they would recognize, that that's their room to walk into. In walking into the room, like if they have favorite artwork, and, things that just kind of speak to them and make them feel calm. Those are kind of the things as far as room setup. Now, as far as after the room is set up, what can help that person transition? Certainly having their caregiver with them. And sometimes we're part of orienting them to their room and showing them certain areas. And then sometimes communities have some protocols that they feel on a professional level that will help that person transition to that community. I have heard that some communities feel like the caregiver maybe should not be making as many visits to begin with, so they get more acclimated on their own. And then I've also heard where providing just as much support on a daily basis. Within the work that we do, we also provide what we call transition support. So if for some reason there was no family close by, like if it was a nephew looking out for an uncle, that type of situation, because that happens.
Yeah.
Then we could be that kind of transitional support to orienting the person and checking up on them for a certain period of time, just and reporting back to the client's caregiver. So that way they kind of know everything has been taken care of and things are off to a good start.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And that makes me think of individuals. We're hearing more and more about solo agers that don't have the family.
Right.
And so they also have to be a part of this conversation too. Have you had any scenario of that with living with dementia?
We actually came in, we were contracted by an elder law attorney to help clear out the house after the woman had transitioned. He was actually her lawyer, and also I think he was her power of attorney, actually. That is probably the one and only as far as a solo ager that she was a military person. She never married. She never had children. She stayed in her home, and then at some point somebody picked up on some signs that she was not really doing well cognitively, and so that move took place.
What would you want every family to know if they ever have to move someone living with dementia? What is your best guidance?
Well, first of all, that they really don't have to do it alone, and that's why companies like mine do exist, is to provide that support for the transition. I do think when a household, finds out that one of their loved ones, has dementia, that because it will progress, and that finding out what those options and resources are for you. Think about maybe doing a consultation with your doctor and maybe even a geriatric care manager when it's early on, because so much comes into play. The financial resources, the safety issues, medications, just so you kind of have a clearer understanding of what life can look like. And as far as we're concerned, we just want to be as supportive as possible to the caregiver and to the person, and make sure that everything goes very seamlessly, planning all the logistics and the room set up. And these aren't typically big moves, but they're very important moves. So we're not talking like a lot of furniture, but to that end, when you are considering of relocating someone to either assisted living or memory care, that they may need different size furniture. And to think along those lines, they may need a single bed, and they may need a recliner in the room, and they may not need a big TV, because a lot of times when you're moving to communities, they're trying to encourage people to come out of their rooms and be with others for socialization. So there's a lot that can be considered, and I think using a professional is a good way to make sure that you feel supported and that you're doing as much as you can to make that transition easier for your loved one and get them off to a good start in a different situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned two things. Geriatric care manager. I believe there's been a shift in their industry. Are they now aging life
They are
care
aging
as
life.
well?
Yeah, I've been in
And
it so long that I still call geriatric care managers.
when you were saying they kind of manage everything, they come in and they look at medication and finances, and they really do take the holistic everything. They're looking at the
Right.
whole picture.
And then when there's a transition, they typically are going to refer to a company like mine. We get lots of referrals from, aging life care associates,
Okay.
managers.
And as far as the senior move manager, how is that just in a high level different than any mover?
So we are professionals that are focused on working with adults 55 and older, and we help plan all the logistics. Many of them are downsizing, will need to downsize. They may have lived in their homes for, 40, 50 years and have a lot of stuff. So we're really in charge of preparing, managing, executing, and completing the transition from start to finish. And we provide floor plans, packing, unpacking help. We're not a moving company. However, I will say some senior move management companies do provide the moving component. My company, we will outsource that to vetted movers that we've worked hand in glove with for years. And so it's very seamless.
And I
And
think that's the clarification, is I want people to understand that it's the process leading into deciding what comes forward with you. You're involved
right,
in that with them.
right,
It's everything on that front side. Like if people take the moving part out,
right.
you know,
There's so many decisions that need to
yeah,
be made. And, Lisa, as you know, with your real estate component, that if they have a house to sell, then they are wrapped up in a lot of decisions about selling the house, and timing becomes very important. And so we're handling all the stuff, and then they have a lot of decisions to make with their items. We are also involved with, after the move takes place, then we come back and are cleaning out the house so it can get on the market, because that's really where the big asset is that can fund a lot of care if that's one of the reasons that they're moving. And there are lots of decisions whether items are going to be sold or donated or consigned. And let's not forget too that as we age, we do have chronic medical conditions that we're dealing with. And so that can, without a lot of good support, some of those situations or conditions can be exacerbated by stress.
oh yeah,
So really, we want to remove as much emotional stress and physical stress from our clients so they're getting from point A to B in the healthiest way,
yeah,
mentally and physically,
yeah.
and start off their next chapter with confidence.
Yeah. When people say, well, we were planning on doing it, or we were going to bring our adult kids in to do it, I'm like, are any of you professional movers and packers and unpackers? We are not our 30-year-old self anymore. None of us.
Right.
I know some people, trying to save money, but there is such a value to be had. Everything you just listed, helping make decisions, helping sell things, helping consign things, helping clear out the house. And then on the other side, once you make the transition, getting you set up, unpacking, helping create the home. That sometimes if you get a traditional mover, there's boxes and you're like, okay, let's start with the closest one to us and
Right.
start unloading, and to
Right.
be relieved of that. So I
Right.
want people to understand the value that a senior move manager brings
Thank you.
in its totality. So there's a lot of things I say to the adult kids, like, you're sitting there thinking about all the logistics and all the things. Like, I know we go from point A to point B and what's the quickest way. And there's going to be a million decisions to make. And so if you have somebody like Cindy in your corner, in everybody's corner, but it just is that extra, and you're there to facilitate and keep people moving forward.
Right.
when people are like, they've made this decision and they want to do something, but they're still not able to, that's
Right.
when they need somebody like you to come in and say, okay, let's break this down, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, the enormity of the amount of decisions and the fact that we are not all 30 years old now
Right.
is, yeah, we have to take that into
I wish we were
consideration.
all 30 years old
I
again.
know. I just had somebody trying to be so proactive, and they had their son involved and their family, and everything was going great. And then they got all the furniture in and decided to move furniture once it was already in there. They wanted the couch somewhere else. And the gentleman ended up like tearing an ab muscle or something
Oh
by moving the
gosh.
furniture. I'm like, we were so close.
Oh gosh.
We were there. And now this. So just to the audience, just be thinking. I don't want to paint worst case scenarios for everyone, but there are services out there and there are professionals and experts that can help. These are not your first time home moves. These are not your great, we got married, let's move. These are so different. And please understand that.
Yeah, and gosh, I can't even list how many times we have been involved with relocations and one of the spouses has gone into the hospital. During the whole planning of the process, we even had a woman who was just determined. She was in her 80s, very viable. But as I said, these are the situations that can exacerbate situations, health. Well, anyway, she would not, let us do as much as we could have done. And she ended up carrying a box from the garage into the house, tripped over the threshold, and fell. Now, I was checking in on that move and checking in with the senior move manager that was overseeing that move. And she told me what had happened. I'm going to call and talk to her husband. And he said, well, she's lying down. I said, I'm so sorry to hear this. How is she doing? She's lying down very peacefully. The EMTs were on the way because they couldn't wake her up. And I had told him to please call the doctor and let them know that she had taken a fall. Falls are very serious for anybody, really, but
Oh,
as
yeah.
we age, they're even more serious. So again, we actually were able to continue on with that move. There were closing dates. She went into the hospital. The family could be family. We got their apartment all set up. Thankfully, she was able to, she had a brain bleed apparently, and she was able to get out of the hospital eventually and go to her new home. But and that's like you said, not trying to be gloom and doom, but this is some of the situations that can happen.
Yeah.
We can also be as much help or as little help. We don't have to do everything. Sometimes we are coordinating with other family members that want to hang the art once it gets over there, so we don't have to do that. And some other aspects of the move if a family member wants to be involved or if our client wants to handle it themselves. So again, it's all very client centered. Each situation is unique and we approach it in that way. The processes are still very much the same, but there are so many different nuances to each individual's situation.
Yeah. But the goal is that you unpack and that they are living in their home sooner than later. That
Without
happens.
boxes stacked around and
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is also a safety thing. And for somebody,
Exactly.
especially, I know we're talking about kind of everyone right now, because I wanted to just make sure that was heard and said. But especially for those living with dementia, the trip, the fall hazard, the not seeing things, boxes all look the same, the color, the monocolor, when they
Right.
can't differentiate the depth and things.
Yes.
So even more important. But well, Cindy, is there anything that you want to make sure is said before we wrap up our conversation today?
I really feel like this was a wonderful, comprehensive conversation. And just to point out that, help is available and just to start having conversations with as many people as you can when you start, if you have a loved one that has received a diagnosis of dementia.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you so much, Lisa, for having me and for bringing attention to this important dynamic to relocation. And Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. We didn't go over your why, so I always ask people like, how did you get into this industry? Because this, I mean, just talking, I think the audience can hear that there are so many dynamics, there's so many personalities, depending on family size and who's involved. There's a lot that goes on here. So I always say it takes a special person. So what was your calling that brought you into senior move management?
Yeah, so it really was helping my mother, looking after her parents, my grandparents. My grandfather passed with Alzheimer's before there were any frontline drugs. She was the caregiver to my father, and she was the caregiver to her mother. And so, looking after both my mother and my grandmother, and relocated them several times because of family dynamics in my own family. And I just loved, my background was in interior design. And so when my mother was going through these transitions and my grandmother, I just loved arranging her things, making sure she loved her things, and so did my grandmother, and doing the room arrangements, all the logistics, getting the movers. I think I was just kind of uniquely positioned or prepared to handle it, and it gave me just such satisfaction, the reward of her walking into the room and seeing all of her things carefully placed. And I thought, wow, maybe other people can use this
Yeah.
help. And that's when I discovered the Senior Move Management Association. The whole industry was just getting started. So yeah, that's my why.
Yeah, well, to have that moment of joy when somebody walks in and embracing this new chapter, which can be, depending on
Daunting.
mindset and how people approach it, can really be one of the hardest transitions. And so to have somebody react in that way with, okay, feeling like it's embracing them, like when you walk into a room and it's giving you a hug. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's what we
nice.
want people to feel. So, well,
Yeah.
Cindy, I have one more request.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I have a ready or not lightning round that I do to finish out every podcast. Would you play
Okay.
along?
Sure.
Okay, very quick questions. No, not a lot of deep thinking. They're just really your first instinct. So,
Okay.
on a house, what is your favorite? Would you pick a front porch or a back deck?
Great. Probably back deck.
Okay. And insider language, what's a phrase or a piece of industry jargon that people outside of your field maybe wouldn't necessarily understand, and what does it really mean?
Oh gosh, that's a big one.
Insider knowledge, yeah. It's always
Insider
interesting.
knowledge. Well, I would say that, I always refer to, communities as communities and not facilities. I feel like that's very important.
And actually, I made a reel years ago where I said don't use the F word, and it was
Yeah,
facility.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Like we need to,
Yeah,
this is somebody's home they're
it
going.
is. It
And
absolutely is.
I like that. So everyone start using community instead of facility. And then the last thing is just one thing at the age of 55. If every listener did just one thing at 55 to make life easier for themselves at 75, what would that be in your opinion?
That's a great question. I think everybody needs to start going through their stuff, like start going through a drawer, start going through a closet, make donation a part of your routine, whether or not you do it, annually. But things can accumulate, and you you don't want to have to pay to have things hauled off that you didn't deal with, or so yeah, I would say start downsizing a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And so I hope we've given people some things to think about that maybe give them some peace and that give them a moment to have a conversation with their loved ones.
Yeah,
When you have time is the time to have the conversation. So,
correct.
so thank you so much, Cindy. Appreciate your expertise and for sharing everything with our audience today.
You're welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me on Not Ready Yet, Curating Conversations for the Aging Journey. If something in this episode gave you clarity or the courage to start an important conversation, or offered a new way to look at things, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need the same encouragement. Remember, navigating aging isn't something we have to do alone or in crisis. With love, logic, and the right tools, we can face what's next with confidence and connection. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, leave a review. It helps others find the show. And just a quick note, the information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for medical, psychiatric, legal, or other professional advice. Always consult a qualified professional for guidance tailored to your unique situation. This is Lisa Harper, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.